Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you back again to the beautiful island of Malta. Wow, we finally made it to St. Paul's Island. Behind me is exactly where the shipwreck happened, and finally, St. Paul and the other members or prisoners, you can say, that were on the ship ended up here at St. Paul's Island. It is fascinating, it is awesome, but as you know, the story doesn't start where it ends. There is a beginning to every story. The beginning to this crazy adventure that Paul had was actually way back in Acts chapter 22 in Jerusalem. A riot rose up, and the Jews in Jerusalem were divided in regards to what they would do with Paul. They were against him because he had been preaching what they call this new way. If you recall, back in those days, the Christianity and the message of the cross was in its early days. And so there were people that were believers in God, but not believers in Jesus Christ and the resurrection. And Paul was chosen as an apostle to preach about the Lord and the resurrection of the Lord. And it was during that time in Jerusalem that a riot broke out, and some of the Jews wanted to kill him. In fact, there were a number of Jews that had vowed, I think it was about 40 people that vowed that they wanted to kill Paul. And so it was a really tough time for the apostle. And it was during this time in Acts chapter 23 that the Lord appeared to him. God, hey, listen, you have been a great witness for me in Jerusalem, and I will take you to Rome, and you shall be a great witness to me in Rome as well. And so as it happened, we now move on to Acts chapter 27, when Paul, as a prisoner, was on a ship bound to Rome. He never wanted to detour and go to Malta. However, this was part of God's will and God's plan. It was from the very beginning God's will and God's plan to get Paul to Rome. But along the way, there was going to be a detour. God didn't tell him that there was going to be a shipwreck and there was going to be a detour and that he was going to land in Malta. Now, one of the things that you and I have to realize is this. Even when we're in God's will, there can be a shipwreck. Now, some people think because there's calamity, there's tragedy, that, oh, that means that you're out of God's will. Oh, not at all. Not at all. This is exactly the kind of thought process that Job's friends had when he went through his trials, when his business was destroyed, when his children were killed, when his health was compromised. His friends said, oh wow, you must have done something. You know, it appeared that Job was not in God's will. Oh, but not so. Job was exactly in the center of God's will. There was a shipwreck. God knew that there was going to be a shipwreck. And as I said, just because you're in a shipwreck or in any other form of calamity or trouble does not mean that you're not in God's will. Paul, the Lord appeared to him in a vision and said, you must appear in Rome. You must. And so you can imagine Paul and his men were on a ship, and there were these waves to the point where Paul said, wow, there's going to be, perhaps I perceive that there's going to be a destruction of the cargo and perhaps a loss of life. Even with this perception, he was still in God's will. God had a plan that regardless of whatever waves was going to happen, that Paul was still going to land in Rome. Yes, shipwreck or whatever else happened, but at the end, God's will was done. At the end, At the end, God's will was done. It is important, even in your life and mine, as we go through different stages in our life, as we go through different trials and calamities, we must remember, we must know, we must continue to trust. Paul heard the word even before he got on the ship headed to Rome. You must get to Rome, the Lord said to him. It didn't matter what was going to happen in the middle. Yes, there was a shipwreck in the middle, but at the end, what God said in the beginning was going to happen in the end. How about for you? How about in your own life? Are you troubled about what's going on currently with you? Have you sought whether or not you're in God's will? Upon prayer, if you know that, yes, I am in God's will, my friends, let me tell you, no need for you to worry. What you ought to do is exactly what Paul did. Continue to trust in the Lord and His word. Hey, we are on the very grounds of where the Apostle Paul was, here at St. Paul's Island, where he landed after the shipwreck. This is Around the Globe with Dr. G.